Hey y'all, I'm back. I actually started this channel back in 2018 when I was living in New Orleans. The whole purpose was to make sure that books are equitable and accessible to everyone, and that included book reviews and partnering with different organizations to make sure that everyone could have access to books and books that they liked especially. So a lot of that went down to book reviews, and so Buku Books was born. Buku Books actually got its name from Buku, a French word that means a lot. And living in New Orleans, it's actually a slang term that people actually use today, even though, America is not necessarily a French speaking country, nor is New Orleans, but has a lot of French roots. And I actually went off the grid for a little while, just because I had a lot going on, working my dissertation, moving, starting a new job. So this is me getting back into it. Today's video are basically my 6-star books. Books that changed the chemistry of my mind. Like reading them changed my life, changed the way I thought about things. They are almost all of them a core piece of who I am and how I function and the books I love to read. So I'm gonna share them with you. My first book I actually don't have a copy of because I read it in high school. Actually, I think this is the first book that really changed my brain. And that book is Go Ask Alice by Anonymous. And I actually picked this up from Urban Outfitters. You know how back then they had a whole table of a bunch of books, that goes with the aesthetic of the store. So I picked this up and I had no idea what it was about, but I love the cover, the anonymous piece. I was just like, oh my God, what is that? That was a real question.
Oh my God, what is that?
Crazy. That book was even crazy to read for a high schooler, let alone an adult. Go Ask Alice is written in diary entries from this girl who is trying to figure out her place in the world, and she ends up encountering different vices, alcohol, drugs, and how she goes along with that journey. I will not spoil the ending, but the ending had me shook. I never read a book that ended like that, and it ruined my life. Next, The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. This book changed me. I had this on my DNF list for a while, and I would try and just couldn't get into it. But then, with the election recently, a lot of people were saying that that America reminded them of this book. So I started reading it again, and this sucker starts in 2024. It was just so surreal, and I was like, oh.
Is this play about us?
But it is about us. It's not a one-to-one analogy for the United States, but I see what people are saying about it. A lot of the natural disasters that were happening, a lot of the themes about capitalism, it very much is about us. So it follows a teenage girl named Lauren as she, goes through her life encountering the world around her that has drastically shifted. It covers a lot of climate change, political commentary, talks about how poverty is a direct result of capitalism and how people, especially minorities, are really faced with the struggle of overcoming these challenges. Highly recommend. Changed my brain chemistry. Next is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. Now, this book starts off in the first chapter, you're like, oh, this is a rom-com. But then you think about it and you're like, wait a second, this says thriller. The book definitely says thriller. It does give a little bit of romance, but the end? This book, the third act, is very much it reminds me, if you ever seen Sorry to Bother You.
This is Langston from Regal View.
However you felt going into that movie, Sorry to Bother You. And that's the same journey that you're on for When No One Is Watching. This book changed the chemistry of my brain. I really was am I on drugs? Am I
on LSD right now?
Am I okay?
Because this book is crazy. This story follows a young woman named Sydney who lives in New York, and her neighborhood is becoming gentrified. She's on a journey to record all of their history to make sure it's preserved as, different populations are starting to move into the neighborhood. And it gets crazy. Changed the chemistry of my brain. Definitely recommend. The next book is actually one that I read when I was in high school. I don't know how I came upon this author, but I remember reading it and reading the synopsis and wondering, I don't understand how this author's gonna do it. And so this is The Sellout by Paul Beatty, who's actually one of my favorite authors. This is a story of a Black man trying to reinstate slavery by challenging the Supreme Court. Race-based slavery. of Black people. And this was crazy. I think this was my first real like interaction with satire in a way that I was like, wow, you did your thing. Because as I'm going on this journey, I'm really like, I understand.
You what?
But at the same time, you're like, no, you should not be doing this. Because you're going on this journey with this narrator, you get into the mind and the rationalization of it, which does not make sense. Like, it does not make sense. And so that's why I said, shout out to Paul Beatty. He's one of my favorite authors. For you to even question the reasoning of slavery, that's crazy. And so, like, the journey that he puts you on is amazing. And it's funny, I actually went to church one day. I was sitting there and waiting with my mom, and she was like, oh, what are you reading? And I was like, oh, The Sellout by Paul Beatty. It's about this Black guy who wants to have Black slaves. And I remember everyone looking around like, and my mom was so embarrassed. She was like, ever see something like that again around these. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Saying it out loud is crazy. And writing it in this book, well-written book, is crazy. Changed the chemistry in my mind. Definitely recommend. This next book, 1000% changed the chemistry in my mind. And is definitely 6 out of 5 stars. Definitely one of my favorite books of all time. And that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Definitely one of my favorite writers, especially contemporary. This follows the life of a young Asian boy named Robin who is living in London and trying to get an education. And so he is actually studying linguistics. He studies translation specifically, and he encounters this world of magic. And what I really appreciate about this book, because I'm not a big fantasy person. I will read it, but I'm not a big fantasy person. What I appreciate about this and about her writing in general, because she also did it with the Poppy Wars, is that it's not really this huge fantasy thing. It's like one aspect of the world is fantasy. It's not a whole world building concept around it. It's very much based in, you know, the history that we know of the world today, but she adds like one little thing of fantasy. And so the journey, the commentary that she does is amazing. I will say, if you ever read R.F. Kuang, her biggest critique is that she thinks her readers are dumb. And I don't think she thinks that her readers are dumb. I just think that she wants to make her point, and she makes sure to make her point. And you won't know her point. Anyway, 6 out of 5 stars. Changed my brain. Definitely recommend. This book finally made it off of my DNF list, and that is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. And this is a thickums. This book is so thick. That's what took me so long to read it. It's like 800 pages. And it was just daunting at first. And then when I first read it, I was like, this is so boring. Like, I don't want to read this history. Like, it's very much 2 different timelines coming together, but you don't really realize that it's 2 different timelines coming together. You're just like, what am I reading? And this bad boy changed the chemistry in my mind because of the way that it did it. It was beautifully written. I don't know. I felt very seen in it, especially as a Black young woman who goes to get her education. It just covers a lot of topics and themes that are prevalent to Black people, prevalent to women, and put it in a context that's both historical, social, and current. This last book, girl.
Child. Anyway, so
this last book, say it with me, changed the chemistry of my mind, and that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. This is about 2 young kids who meet and have a friendship that is based in video games. And as they get older, they reconnect and decide to build a video game together. Now, I do immersive reading. I do reading where I listen to my audiobook and I read along with the book at the same time. And whenever I'm driving, I make sure to play the audiobook as I'm driving. So I don't always have the book in front of me. But this book, you gotta have it. You gotta have it in front of you. Because I listened to the audiobook and the scene, you know that scene happened. I was driving, I was like, ain't no way. There's no way this is happening right now. And I had to pull over because it was that crazy. I will also say there's a scene that's really beautifully written, and I've never seen a book talk about it this way, but we're in a video game at one point. Like, we are existing in a video game, and how it's written is just so beautiful and so jarring. I don't know, it's just so beautifully written that it will always have a place in my heart. It will always be a part of me. It has changed me forever. And that is Tomorrow. All right, so those are 6 books that have changed my mind forever. I really want to know what books have changed you, what books have, been embedded in your mind for forever, please let me know. I want to add them to my list, and maybe I'll get back to you about if I agree. Anyway, thank you. Bye.
Bye, buddy. Hope you find your dad.